Hello everyone. So this video is going to be an update to a project that I did about a year or 2 years ago. I can't remember the exact timeline. And it is a project about the MealDB API where we built a project called Food Palace, which was a mobile app. So the reason why this is an update is because the API was updated, and so that project no longer works as it was working. So I'm going to do a rebuild of it here. Even though we used React Native in the previous project, for this one, we're going to use React and Vite. So I don't have a preview of the project open, but I should be able to record it at the end of the project and then just edit it and bring the demo right about here. So here is a demo. We have a search input right here. We have a navbar, we have an H1, we have categories, and then we have our meal cards right there. So inside the search input, we're going to be using debouncing so that you can search for meals. So you can search for chicken. It debounces the value by 500 milliseconds, so 0.5 seconds. And then it triggers the search functionality and then shows you the meal cards according to what you have typed in. Now, if you type in something that doesn't exist, then it simply shows this on the screen. And then if you type in partly a name for a food, then it's simply going to get all the meals that have that name contained within it. And then of course, when you click on one item here, it is going to take you into an inner page, which shows you that particular meal and then the ingredients used to make it, and then how to make that particular meal. And then you have a very nice sticky navbar on the top. And for our routing, we're going to use React Router DOM. So that is the entire demo of the application. And of course, we have the categories. How could I forget to mention the categories? So when you click on any category here, it is going to fetch meals depending on that category. I hope you enjoyed the project, and let's go ahead and begin. So first of all, I have my code editor here, which I think from this project forward, I'm simply going to call this VS Code because it's easier than mentioning every time that this is VS Codium and explaining why I use it and so on and so forth. So I'm just going to call it VS Code from this project forward. And I hope someone who sees me in the future is not going to blame me in the comments. So this instance is open and my terminal is also open, and I can toggle it using Control and J. So I'm going to save it into my desktop, and then inside my desktop, I'm going to create a new project here called, I'm going to create a new React Vite project. So pnpm create Vite at latest, and I'm going to call this food-palace-update. And then we're going to use React, and then we're going to select React with the speedy web compiler, so the third option. And then we don't want to use Vite 8 because, as you can see, it's still experimental. And if you know me, I don't like using the experimental stuff. So no. And then we don't want to install dependencies right away. So no. And then we can simply say Codium food-palace-update and then -r, which is going to restart this instance. But then it's going to open up that folder. And there we go. So this is our React Vite project. And before we can begin typing away, I want us to install some dependencies that we're going to need. So first of all, once again, in our terminal, I'm going to go ahead and install, we want React Router DOM, we want Framer Motion, so Framer Motion, and then we want Tailwind CSS, and then add Tailwind CSS /vite, Tailwind CSS /vite. And then as these are installing, I'm going to jump into our Vite config, and we're going to import Tailwind CSS right here. So import Tailwind CSS from at Tailwind CSS /vite. Okay, my computer is lagging. Okay, there we go. Oops, really? Okay, and then all we need to do is just have Tailwind CSS right here and call the function. Now I can save that, and I hope the audio did not cut when I was importing this line. Now once we have that, then we're going to jump into the source folder. We can delete the assets folder, we don't need it. We can also delete the app.css folder, and then inside the app.css we can select everything and then simply export default function app, and then we can return a div that says app. We can save that, and then in our index.css we can select everything. We're going to have some custom CSS, but all we need to do is just say import Tailwind CSS right here, so that Tailwind is going to function. Now we are not going to do anything in the main.jsx, but then we can now start our dev server by saying pnpm dev, and this should open up on localhost 5173. So let's go ahead and open this up. And you can see right here that app is what is rendered on the screen. Now, the first thing I want to do is get the font that we're going to use for this project. So I'm going to jump into fonts.google.com. And then I'm going to search for a font here called Barlow. So this first one. And then I'm going to say get font. And then inside this shopping cart right here, I'm going to say get embed code and ensure that you only have one font inside here. Otherwise, if you have multiple fonts, then when you get the embed code, it's going to get all the fonts that you've selected. So copy this, and then inside our index.html, we're going to paste it right there, and then change the title to Wood Palace. Save that, and then inside our index.css, we can select the asterisk, and then say the font family for all this is going to say Barlow with a fallback of sans serif. And then now if you take a look at the application, the font has been updated. So with that, we can place this to the right and then place our code editor to the left so that we can begin building out the structure of our application. So inside the app.jsx, this is what we're going to do. We're going to go ahead and import browser router from React Router DOM. We're also going to import the routes and then the route. And then we're going to import animate presence from Framer Motion and then motion as well from Framer Motion. And then we're going to import a component that we don't have called home. This is coming from .pages/home. So we need to create this. And then we're also going to import main detail, meal detail. This is coming from .pages/meal detail, or you can call it meal details. And then we're going to import navbar from .components/navbar. And then let's go ahead and create these three. So inside source, create a new file called components/navbar.jsx, and that is going to create the folder called components and then the file called navbar. And then you can say export default function navbar. And then inside you can simply return a div that says navbar. You can copy that and then save it. And then inside the source folder again, you can create a new file called pages/home.jsx. And this should be inside pages. Okay, correct. And then you can paste this in, change this to say home. And what I've done there is highlight this and then Control D to highlight the next one. And then that's how you can add multiple cursors to change the text. And then we need meal details. So meal detail.jsx, paste this in, highlight this, Control D, meal detail. So save that, and then can continue building out our app. So we're going to say function animate presence. We're going to open this up and we're going to say const location. Location is equal to use location. So I also forgot to import use location, but you can see I have auto imported it right here. So in case you forget to import it, you can simply go to the end of the word and then Control spacebar. It is going to give you this drop down, and then you can simply say tab, enter, or click on it, and it is going to auto import it right on the top. And then we're going to go ahead and return, and we want to return the animate presence component. And the mode that we're going to give it is wait. And you can read more about this component in the Framer Motion documentation. And then inside here, we're going to turn a div, but not just any ordinary div, because we want Framer Motion to have access to this div. So we're going to say motion.div, and that gives Framer Motion access to that div so that you can animate it using the Framer Motion library. So this div is going to have a key of location.pathname, and then the initial status of this div is going to have an opacity of 0, and ensure that you're giving it the object notation, as you can see, double curly brackets. And then the y value of this div is going to be 10. And then once you do that, and let me save it so that it goes to the next line. I think it's going to be easier. And then we want to animate this div to an opacity of 1. So show the div, and then bring it to the y value of 0. So bring it upwards just a bit so that it kind of slides in. And then on exit, so when you exit, then you want the opacity to go back to 0, and then the y value is going to go to -10. So kind of like slides in and then slides out. Then the transition is going to have a duration here of 0.25 seconds, just like that. Now inside this div, we're going to go ahead and create our routes. And the routes, what it does is that it is going to iterate over all the paths that you're going to have in your application. And then it's going to return the first route, now singular, that matches. So if you ever built anything with React Router DOM beforehand, like with the previous versions, routes is basically what switch used to do. So right here, we're going to give it a location of location. And then inside the routes, we're going to have the singular route, which is going to have a path of /. And then when we're on the /, then we want to render an element here called the home page. And then close this out. And then we're going to give it another route here, which is going to be a dynamic value. So /mil, and then full colon ID, which is going to act as our unique, our unique slug of the address bar. Now the element that we want to render here in this case is called meal detail, and then close that out. Now that is our entire animate presence. So now we actually need to go ahead and build out the app. So export default function app. And then we're going to go ahead and say return, and we want to return the browser router. So browser router is the routing method that we're using. And I do know that there is another way that you can use an array of objects, but I really like this method of using the browser router. That's why I'm always sticking to it, even in the most recent projects such as this one. Now inside the browser router, we want the navbar to appear over everything, or rather to appear on every page that we're going to have. So we're going to render it inside the navbar. Also, we're going to render it not within any routes. And then we also want the animate presence, which I've just built above, to appear on every page. And not really to appear, but to be used on every page so that these animations can be used. So we are not rendering it inside any route or inside the routes. So that's how you do it if you want this to appear in your layout of application without depending on any particular route. And I apologize, this is not animate presence, this is animated routes. So animated routes. And it was giving me this error when I was building it out, because for some reason it is not detecting this motion right here. But when you save it, then it should still work. As you can see, it is showing the navbar. So let's go ahead and build the navbar right away, because that is the only component that we're seeing on the screen. So inside components, and then navbar. Let's go ahead and build this out. So the navbar is going to be very simple. We're going to go ahead and import the link component from React Router DOM. And then inside the navbar, we're going to go ahead and return the header component with a class name here of sticky, and then top-0 with a z-index of 50, and then backdrop-blur-medium, then bg-surface with an opacity of 80, and then border-bottom and border-border. Now, of course, you're wondering where this class is coming from and where this is also coming from. Well, it is a class that we're going to create in our CSS. So for now, let's just have this. Now, inside our header, we're going to return a div with a class name of container, and then mxauto, padding on the x of 6, padding on the y of 4, and then flex and items-center, and then justify-between. Now, inside this div, we're going to have the link component, which is going to go into the / when you click on it, and it is going to have a class name of text-xl and font-semi-bold and tracking-tight, and then text-primary. So text primary is also a class that we're going to create, and the text for the link is going to say food palace. And then below the link, we're going to have a span with a class name of text-sm and then text-muted, and the span is going to say discover beautiful recipes. Now let's separate that, and then when we save it, then that is going to be our navbar. So you can see it looks a bit ugly because we don't have some of these class names, such as this one right here. But for now, the navbar is going to suffice, and now we can build out the home page so that we can actually see something that is being rendered on the home page. So let's jump into pages and then home.jsx. Now this is going to require a lot of components. And okay, let me not say a lot, it's not a lot, but it's a couple of components. So if we import them, we're going to import the use state hook. We are also going to import a custom hook called use debounce, which you don't have. So use debounce from ./hooks/use debounce. And this is going to help us in order to manage our keystrokes when you're searching for a meal. And then we're also going to import another custom hook called use meals. This will also be coming from /hooks/use meals. We're going to import another custom hook called use infinite scroll. This is coming from /hooks/use infinite scroll, just like that. And of course, you can guess what that does. And then we're going to import a component here called meal card, which is coming from /components/meal card. And then let's copy this down 2 more times. So copy 2, and then highlight this, and then Control D. We're also going to need the skeleton card, and then highlight this, and then Control D. We're going to need the category tabs, and both of them are coming from the components. Now, once you have that, then obviously we need to go ahead and create this file so that we don't have any issues. So inside the source folder, we're going to create a new file called hooks/use_debounce.jsx. And then inside hooks, we're also going to create use meals.jsx, JSX. And then we're also going to create use infinite scroll.jsx, just like that. And then because these are hooks, technically they're not going to be returning any JSX, so you can rename them into JS. And we also need the meal card. So inside the components, we need meal card.jsx. And I refrained from mentioning an extension that I have, which is called ES7 Plus React Redux and React Native Snippets, which when you install, it is going to give you access to shorthand properties such as RFC, which is going to allow you to generate this dummy code for you so that you don't have to type it out every single time. And then we can create another one here called skeleton card.jsx. And then if I say RFC again, enter, save it, and it generates that. And then we need the category tabs, so category tabs.jsx, RFC, enter, save. And the extension is called ES7 Plus right here. So ES7 Plus React Redux and React Native Snippets. So you can go ahead and install it. Or if you don't want to install it, then simply type it out. Now, for our homepage, this is what we're going to do. Because we need access to all of this before we can begin to build it, then we actually need to go ahead and build out these hooks. So let's jump into use debounce.jsx and then let's build it out. The good thing about the custom hooks is that they're not very big. They are very simple, relatively simple. So inside use debounce, we're going to import use effect and then use state. And then we're going to say export default function use debounce. And use debounce is going to take in an argument here called value, and then we're going to delay the execution by 500 milliseconds. So if you want to delay it further, you can simply adjust this value. And then we're going to have some state value here called debounced value and set debounced value. This is going to be equal to use state. And by default, we want to debounce the value that we're passing in as an argument. So when we're using this hook, we're going to pass in a value, and that value is going to most likely be a string, and that is the value that you want to delay, or in this case, debounce by 500 milliseconds. Now, once we have that, then we're going to have our use effect. Open this up like so. And the use effect is going to have a dependency array of value and then the delay, meaning every time that the value changes, meaning we are typing something inside an input, then you want to pause the use effect from executing, or rather want to execute the use effect every single time it changes. And then when we type in something inside the input, then the delay is also going to reset so that this function is going to pause for a moment. Now inside here, we're going to have const timer is equal to set timeout, and then open this up like so. And we want to time out the set debounced value and then pass in the value of whatever you're going to type in. And the delay, so the timeout is going to have a delay here. Usually you can pass in a delay of like 1000 milliseconds, but the delay in this case is just our delay argument, which we're passing on top. Now, once you have the timer here, then we need to go ahead, or the once we have a set timeout, then we want to clear timeout. So we're going to return a cleanup function here where we're going to say clear timeout, clear timeout, and then pass in the timer just like that. Now, once you have that, then we want to go ahead and return the debounced value like so. So that is our entire function, looking very nice. We can close this, and then we can jump into the use meals, and then we can begin to build this out. Now, use meals is a bit longer because it requires some functions from another file which we're going to create. So the first thing that we need to do is import our hooks. So use effect, use state, and then use memo as well. And then we're going to go ahead and import search meals, and then get meals by ID, and then get meals by category. This is going to come from /lib/utils, which you don't have. So you can go ahead and create that file right away. So inside the source folder, create a new file called lib/utils.js. And then we can have this as empty for now. And then inside here, we're also going to have a variable here called page size. So page size by default is going to be 8, meaning we want to show 8 items per page, because we're going to be implementing infinite scroll. So once we have viewed all the 8 items, then when we scroll down, it's going to generate some other items for us. And then we're going to say export default function use meals. And this is going to take in the search query, and then the meal ID, whatever I typed, search query, and then the meal ID, and then the category. Open this up, and then we're going to have our state variable. So const all meals and set all meals is equal to use state. By default, it is going to be an empty array, because when we get the meals from the API, then we're going to populate our state value. And then we're going to have const visible count and set visible count, and this is going to be equal to use state. And by default, we're going to pass in the page size that we've just created above as our variable. And then const meal and set meal is equal to use state. By default, it is going to be null. And then const loading and set loading equal to use state. By default, it is going to be false. And then const error and set error, this is going to be equal to use state. By default, it is going to be null. Now once we have that, then we're going to have our use effect. Inside this use effect, we're going to create a function here called fetch meals, and fetch meals is going to be an asynchronous function. It is not going to have any arguments, but we're going to open this up, and we're going to say set loading into true. So we want to show our loading animation. Set error into null, even though it is null by default. But the reason why you need to do this here is because perhaps your application was running some other place and then error was populated. So you need to set it back to null. Otherwise, it is going to be showing a previous error. And then we're going to say set visible count into the page size, which we created above. And then we can have our try catch block. So let's start with the catch because it's easier. So we're simply going to say set error. And we're going to pass in a message here called failed to fetch meals. Fetch meals. And then we can move this error here because we're not using it. And then for our finally block, we can say set loading false. And then for our try block, we're going to say let results equal to an empty array. And then we want to check if such query, meaning if we have typed in something inside the input, then we're going to say results is equal to await search meals, which is our custom function, and then pass in the search query like so. And then else if the category is present, then we want to show results depending on the category. So we're going to say await get meals by category, and then pass in the category that we click on. And then below this, we're going to say set all meals into the results, not meals, into the results that we get back. So depending on whether we are typing in or depending on whether we are clicking on a category. And then once we have this function, which ends here, we need to go ahead and call it, remember. And then we're going to pass in as dependency arrays to the use effect. We're going to pass in search query and category as well. So that is our first use effect. Now our second use effect for the use meals hook is going to be getting a meal by its ID. So we're going to have a use effect. Open this up. And we want to check if there's no meal ID. If there's no meal ID, then we're going to simply fail it silently. And then we're going to say if there's a meal ID, then const fetch meal is equal to an asynchronous function. Open this up. We're going to say set loading into true. And this is fairly simple. So for the try block, we're going to say const result is equal to await get meal by ID, and then pass in the meal ID. And the meal ID, remember, is coming from right here. So we're going to pass it in as a parameter when we're using the use meals custom hook. And then once we get the result, then I'm going to say set meal into the result that we get back. Now, if there's an error, and we don't need this because we're not using it in this project, we're going to say set error, and the error is going to say failed to fetch meal details. And then for our finally, we're going to say set loading back to false, just like that. Now, of course, remember that we have created this function, so we need to call it right here. So fetch meal, and then for the dependency array for this use effect, it is going to be dependent on the meal ID. So when you get a different meal, then you want this to fetch the details for that particular meal. Now, meals is going to be memoized, so use memo so that we don't have to refetch it every single time. So we're going to go ahead and return all meals dot slice, and we want to slice the first meal, so index 0, up to the visible count, and the visible count, remember, is equal to, is equal to this right here, which is the page size. So for example, what it means basically, or rather the reason why we're doing this is because if you're viewing meals for like chicken, and chicken has 200 items, which on a previous search you already searched for, and you viewed all of them, then it is going to store it in memory so that when you search for chicken again, it is going to load in much faster and you don't have to load in the entire thing again. So that's why we are memoizing meals right here. So visible count is right there. Now, outside of the first bracket, it is going to have a dependency array here called all meals, and then the visible count, just like that. And then, of course, we're going to have another variable here called has more, which we're going to use in our intersection of observer when you're building out the infinite scroll. So has more is going to be checking for the visible count if it is less than all meals.length. And basically what it's saying is that check whether what we are seeing on the screen is less than the total number of meals that are available in that particular category or in whatever we are searching for. And if that is the case, then it means that that particular category has more meals to show. Now we're going to have another function here called load more, and this is going to be saying set visible count, open the subcheck for the previous value, which in this case is 8, and then we're going to say that add the previous value with the page size, just like that. And that's how you're going to load more items. And then finally, we're going to go ahead and return meals, and then meal, and then loading, and then error, and then load more, and then has more, just like that. And that is our entire hook complete. So you can save that. And then now we can create our infinite scroll. And the infinite scroll is going to be as follows. We're going to import use ref from React, and then export default function use infinite scroll. This is going to take in the callback as an argument, and then has more. So basically what we're going to be passing in from right around here. So has more. So if it is has more, then you want to trigger the infinite scroll, and we're going to say const observer is equal to use ref, just like that. So that is going to be our ref, and then const last element ref is equal to, this is going to take in the node, and then we're going to open this up and say if observer.current, because we're using ref so we can access the current, then we want to return observer.current.disconnect, and then I'm going to say observer.current is equal to new intersection observer, just like that. And then we're going to pass in the entries, and then we're going to say if entries, and then square brackets 0, so the first item dot is intersecting and has more is also true, then you want to trigger the callback function, which you're going to pass in right here. And then below this, we're going to say if node is present, then we're going to say observer.current.observe current.observe. How do you spell observe? Really? Observe.observe, and then pass in the node just like that. And then we want to go ahead and return the last element ref, just like that. And that is our infinite scroll complete. So you can save that. And then now you would think that we're jumping back inside here, but not yet, because we need to go ahead and create the functions for our utils. So let's go ahead and do that first of all. Now, inside our utils, we're going to create a custom file called API, and this is going to be coming from a file called Axios. Now, Axios is going to be as follows. So inside the source folder, create a new file called API/Axios.js. And Axios, because this is a custom component, rather a custom file that uses Axios in order to help us to get the data from the API. So Ctrl-J to open up your terminal, add a second terminal here, and then you can just say npm install Axios. I forgot to install that one at the beginning. But then inside our utils, we're going to go ahead and say export const search meals. This is going to be an asynchronous function, which is going to take in the query. And we're going to open this up like so. Oops. Okay, my computer froze. So let me go ahead and just restart that because I feel like it might have messed with the audio. So export const search meals is equal to an asynchronous function. And this is going to take in the query. And open this up, and then we're going to say const and then destructure the data, because when you're searching with Axios, we can get back the data, or rather we're going to get back the response.data. This is going to await the API, so await API from our file above .axios.get, and you want to get the search.php endpoint. And this endpoint takes in a parameter. So params, it takes in a parameter which we're going to open up, and it is called s, and we're going to make it equal to our query which you type in. Now I'm going to explain these parameters in a moment, but let's continue building out our functions first of all. Now for this first one, we're going to return data.meals. So return data.meals, and if that does not exist, then return an empty array. Now let's go ahead and build our second function. So export const get meal by ID. This is also an asynchronous function taking the ID, and we're going to say const data. So the structure it is equal to await API dot API dot get, and this is going to be looking for the lookup PHP. Then open this up. The params that it is going to accept is I, which we're going to pass in the ID, and then we're going to go ahead and return data.meals question mark, return the first item, otherwise return null. Our third function here is called export const get default meals. Now we did not use this in the previous hook that we are creating, but we're going to use it for the homepage, so we need it. So this is going to be equal to an asynchronous function. It is not going to have any arguments, but once again, so destructed the data. This is now going to await API.get, and we want to get at the endpoint, which is called filter.php. And then the parameters that is going to accept is C, and in this case, we're going to pass in seafood as the default parameter, and then we're going to return data.meals, or simply an empty array if none exist. And then let's also create export const get categories. This is a synchronous function. It doesn't have any arguments. And then once again, const data is equal to await API.get passing list.php. Open this up. This takes in the params as C, and we're going to pass in the list as the parameters. And then we're going to return data.meals, or we're going to return an empty array. And then we should be on the final one. We need the export const get meals by category. This is also an asynchronous function, and it is going to take in the category. So we're going to say const data is equal to await API.get, and we're now hitting the filter.php endpoint, and this takes in the params as C, which we're going to pass in as the category that we're passing in our parameters, and then we're going to return data.meals, or we're simply going to return an empty array. Now all of these PHP files that you're seeing here are endpoints from the mealdb database which we're using. So let's take a look at it a moment. So the mealdb, what's happening right here? So in the MealDB database, we are using the free API, even though they have a paid API. But if you want to search for a meal by its name, then the endpoint that you're hitting is called search.php, and then the parameter that you're passing in is called s. And then if you want to get a meal by its ID, then you need to hit the lookup.php endpoint, and then the parameter that you're passing in question mark, let me zoom in. The parameter that you're passing in is called I, and that is what we're doing right here. And then you need to pass in the ID of that particular meal, and that's what we're doing right there. And then we are also hitting the filter.php, but you can see, let me see. Let me search for filter.php. Is it here? Right here. So if you want to get some meals, so in this case, filter by main ingredient, you can hit the filter.php endpoint, and then if you, in this case, want to filter by the category, so you're passing in the parameter called C and then setting the category into seafood. But here they're filtering by main ingredient, so you can do that by passing in I as a parameter and then the ingredient name right there. So all of these are just endpoints that we are passing in. So now we are almost done, but we need to go ahead and jump into this file. It is very simple. So axios.js. So I'm simply going to say import axios from axios, and then we're going to say const API is equal to axios.create, and then we're going to open this as an object. We want to create the base URL, which is going to be the base URL of our API, and then the timeout that we're going to give it is going to be 10,000 milliseconds, and then we're going to say export default API like so. So the base URL in this case is going to be the base URL of the API, which is basically this part right here. So copy, and you can go into a new page. So go to this page so that you can copy the link from here. And is that correct? Has issues, maybe. Let's hope it doesn't have issues. And then you can paste it in so that it attaches the HTTPS at the beginning. So HTTPS and then www.themildb.com/API/JSON/v1/1. That should be the API. Okay, so I was just confirming that this is indeed the endpoint. So you can save that. And then now if you take a look at the utils.js file, basically what you're saying is if you want to search for a meal, then we're going to pass in the base URL here. And then at the end of it, we're going to attach the search.php. So if we try to do that, let's go open this up. And then at the end of this / attach the search.php. Oops, that's the wrong file. Then you can see that it says no meals found. Fantastic. That's not what I wanted. But we're going to be able to test this out. Oh, you know what? It's because we did not pass in a parameter. So let's go ahead and just build out our application because we're going to be able to test this out anywho. So right inside here, let's go ahead and continue building out the homepage. So the homepage is going to have some state values here. So const search and set search. This is going to be equal to use state. And by default, it is going to be an empty string. Then const category and set category. This is equal to use state. By default, we're going to say seafood. And I've selected that because that is also the default category that you have passed in right here. And then we're going to say const debounced search is equal to use debounce, so calling our custom hook. And then we're going to pass in the search, and then we're going to debounce it by 500 milliseconds. So once again, if you remember the use debounce, it takes in the value here, which is basically this. So we are debouncing whatever we type in by 500 milliseconds. And then we're going to say const and then destructure meals, and then loading error, load more, and has more. This is all coming from use meals. And we're going to pass in the debounced search, and then null, and then the category. Now, why are we doing that? Because use meals rather takes in the search query, which in this case we're passing in as the debounced search right here. And remember that the debounced search is also debouncing the search that we type in. And then it also takes in the meal ID. So basically we're saying that when we're on the home page, we don't need the meal ID. So we want to pass in null. And then it takes in the category right here as well, so that you can search for a meal by its category. And in this case, the category is basically seafood, as you can see right there. Now I also want to get the last element ref. and this is going to be coming from use infinite scroll right here, and this is going to check in the load more and then the has more as well. Now load more is the callback function in use infinite scroll. So if I can open this up, really, use infinite scroll. So we are passing in a callback function, which in this case is the load more function. And if check use mills, the load more function is what calls the set visible count right here, meaning it is going to increase the number of items that we can see per page. So infinite scrolling. Now we can begin to build out our return. So we're going to turn a div here with a class name of container and then mx auto, padding on the x of 6 and then padding on the y of 12. And then inside here, we're going to turn an h1 with the class name of text-4xl and font-semi bold, margin bottom of 6, and then tracking -tight. Really, give me the drop down. There we go. And then this is going to say discover recipes. Below the h1, we're going to have an input, and this input is going to be as follows. It is going to be a type of text. The placeholder is going to say search for meals ... and then the value here is going to be dependent on this search, and then on change, when you type inside it, you want to call the e event, and then we're going to say set search into e.target.value in order to capture whatever we type inside the input. And then the class name for this is going to say width-full, and then a medium screens width-96, padding on the x of 5, padding on the y of 3, rounded-pill. Now this is a custom class that we don't have, but you can say rounded-full should be okay. And then border, and then border-border, and then bg-surface. And then on focus, we can say ring-2, and then on focus, we can say ring-primary with an opacity of 40, and then margin on the bottom of 8. Now we can save that, and we should be able to see. Okay, so fail to import Axios from Axios. This is inside the libutils. So Axios is coming from, should be coming from // and then API/Axios right there. And then if we reload it, then we should be able to see our input. Can we see our input somewhere? Is our server running? It is running. Reload this. Okay, so it's having trouble reloading. As we're waiting for it, we're going to go below the input, and then we want to check if there is no debounced search, meaning we have not typed inside the input. And only when that is true, that's when we want to go ahead and render the category tabs component. And this is going to take in some props here called selected, which is going to be equal to the category, meaning the category that you select. And then on select is going to be calling the set category function like so. And then below this, we want to check if there's an error. And only when there's an error, that's when we want to have a paragraph here with a class name of text red-500. And then the text is going to say the error. And then below this, we want to check if the meals.length is triple equal to 0. And only when that is true, that's when we want to go ahead and render a paragraph here with the class name of text-primary. And the paragraph is going to say this meal does not exist. Try adjusting your search results. And then finally below this, we're going to have a div, the class name of grade, and then on small screens and above, grade-columns-2, on medium screens and above, grade-columns-3, and then on large screens and above, grade-columns-4, and then give it a gap of 8 all around. And then inside here, we're going to say meals.map. And then for every meal that we get back, we also want to get back its index. We're going to open this up. So curly brackets first of all. And then I'm going to say if the index is triple equal to the meals.length -1, meaning if the index of that particular meal is equal to the last item, then I'm going to say return, and we're going to return a div with a ref here of last element ref, meaning it is on the last element. The key for this is going to say meal.id meal. Close this out, and then we're going to render out the meal card component, and then close out the div like so. And then otherwise, so right below this, we're going to return the meal card. meal card component. The key for this is going to say meal.id meal, and then we're going to pass in the meal as the meal, just like that. So I think I'm doing something wrong. Oh no, it's correct because this needs to be passed in inside here. Now we're going to go below this and we're going to check if loading is true. And if loading is true, then we're going to go ahead and generate an array. So array.from, and we're going to generate an array of 4 items. So length is 4, and then dot map. And we're not interested in the first value that you get back, so we can return an underscore, but we want to pass in the I for index because we are mapping over an item and we want to return the skeleton card, and the key for this is going to be the index, like so, and then close that out, and that is going to be our loading state. So we can save that, and let me shut down our server because this is just misbehaving now, and then let's say pnpm dev, and then let's restart it, and we can see that it seems as though we have an issue. So let me go ahead and inspect, and then console, it says utils does not provide an export at use meals. Okay, so I've messed up my imports. So it should come from what? Dot slash, and then lib / utils. Okay, get meals by ID. What do I call it inside here? Get meals by ID. So it should be get meal. I think that's what I called it. Get meal. So even here, get meal. And then inside utils should be get meal by ID. Okay, that should not be correct. Now let's reload. And we still can't see our input. We still cannot see our input. Okay, so that's an issue. That is an issue because the home page should be rendering, right? The home page should be rendering on the / page. Oh, you know what? This should be here. I made that mistake. Okay. Apologize for that. Now if you save that, and there we go. There we go. So now we can see our category tabs. You can see our H1, our input, and we can also see all the meal cards. Fantastic. So the next part that you need to build is the category tabs, and you can test out whether the input is working. So if I search for chicken, then you can see it says fail to fetch meals. Okay, that's still a problem because it should not say that. So fail to fetch meals is coming from here, and it's because of what? We should probably attach the error here. I did not want to use it, but let's go ahead and attach it so that you can see the exact issue. Come on, give me the error, or error.message. Give me the error. Well, that's annoying. That is very annoying. Instead of doing this, let's go ahead and say console.error, then pass in the error.message. And then if we reload it, and then F12 to open up our terminal, let's zoom in this. Let's search for chicken. Let's see what it says. Cannot read properties undefined of reading get. So when you type inside the input, then something is wrong in our search meals. So api.axios.get. Oh, wait a minute. It says here it is in await fetch meals. Await in fetch meals. So in the home page, we should have await. Nope, that's not it. Use meals. Await and fetch meals here. Yeah, so okay, so I was correct. It is still in this error, in this part. So it's saying that it is undefined, but Undefined can only be if we are not capturing this correctly. Set search into e.target.value. That's correct. Okay, let me not worry about it for now because we still have a ways to go with this application. So let's go ahead and build out the category tabs first of all. And notice how we were adding the debound search right here. So we added this check. So when you type in something, we cannot see the category tabs as you can see. But once we don't have anything, then you can see the category tabs. So let me place this to the right. And then let's jump inside category tabs right here. Let's build this out. So we're going to start by importing use effect, and use state. And then we're also going to import get categories from libutils, and then export default function category tabs from this app. This takes in some props, so we're going to destructure them. So selected and then on select. And notice that these are not arguments, these are props. And it is not an arrow function. And this is going to have only one state value. So categories and set categories is equal to use state. By default, it is going to be an empty array. And then we're going to have a use effect here. And our use effect is going to say const load, so a function here, and a synchronous function where we're going to say const data is equal to await get categories. So getting the categories, the custom function. And then we're going to say set categories into the data that we get back. And then of course remember to call the function, so load, like so. And then we're going to pass in an empty dependency array so that it only runs once. And then we're going to turn a div here, the class name of flex gap-3 overflow-x-auto, and then padding bottom of 2 and margin bottom of 8. Close that out. Inside this, we're going to map over our categories. So categories.map. And then for every category that you get back, I'm calling it cat. Then we're going to go ahead and return a button with the key of cat.category. So cat.str category. And then on click, so when you click on this button, we're going to pass in an inline function here, and we're going to say on select and pass in the cat.str category. And then the class name for this is going to be dynamic, so curly brackets and then backticks. We're going to say party on the x of 4, party on the y of 2, text-sm rounded dash full, and then white space dash no wrap, and then transition, and then $sign curly bracket. We want to check if selected is triple equal to the cat.str category, meaning the category matches. Then if that is true, we're going to attach a class called bg-primary as well as text-white. And then if it is not true, then we're going to attach bg-surface and then border, and then border, and then border-border. And then on hover, bg-gray-100, and then on dark mode, and then on hover, we're going to say bg-gray-800. Oh, I forgot to mention, we're going to build a dark mode for this. Now the button is simply going to go ahead and render the cat.str category. If we save that, we should be able to see our categories right there. Look at that. So this is the currently highlighted category, meaning it is the seafood. But when I click on this, it should also highlight that. So you can see that our categories are working, and then our meal cards should also update to show the correct meals as well. So the next component that we need to work on is our meal card component. So let's jump into meal card right here. Now this is also going to be fairly simple. We're going to import the link component from React Water DOM. And then this takes in a prop called meal. So we're going to destruct it. And then we're going to return the link component. So link, this is going to be linking to, and it is going to be linking to a dynamic value. So curly brackets and then backticks. And then it goes into /meal and then $$ in curly bracket meal.id meal. Now, why do I know that? Because in our app, we said that when you want to show the meal details, then we want to go into the /meal and then the unique ID of that particular meal. That's how we can get the meal details. Now, I did not show this in the API correctly, so I apologize for that. But let's go ahead and jump into the meal DB once again. probably, and hopefully this works. So we want to go into the API first of all, and then let's go ahead and open this up. Really, go to, and you can see right here that when you're searching for a meal, you get the ID meal, you get the str meal, the str meal alternate, and you get all these other values. You also get the ingredients, which we're going to do something unique that I really I did it in some kind of way in the previous video, but I discovered a much easier way to do this, and we're going to jump into that. But we're saying that every meal has a meal ID, which is unique. So we can search for a meal by its ID. It has the name, it has the alternate name, depending on the region that it comes from. It also has the category, which we are using for str category in the category tabs right here. So str category. So in case you're wondering where this is coming from, it is all coming from the API. We can get the instructions, which we're going to use when we're building out the unique ID page. You can get the thumbnail, so the photo of that particular meal, and then you can get the tags and the YouTube whatever, and the ingredients, and then the measures, and so on and so forth. So all this data is coming from the API, and I apologize that I did not showcase this better. But then if you continue to build this out, now instead of rendering meal card, first of all, this needs to have a class name of group, because we're going to have some hover events on it. Inside this, we're going to turn a div with a class name of bg surface, and then rounded dash card, and shadow dash card, and then overflow dash hidden. And overflow hidden is going to be important so that when you hover over the card, then the image kind of zooms in without pushing the card outside. And then we're going to say transition with a duration of 300. And then on hover, we're going to say minus translate on the Y by 1. So move the card inwards and upwards just a bit. And then on hover, we're going to say shadow dash XL. And that should be the correct classes. Okay. Now inside this, we're going to have another div with a class name of aspect dash square. And then overflow dash hidden. Inside this, we're going to have an image, and this image is going to have a source of meal.str meal thumb. And then the alt attribute is going to say meal.str meal. So simply show the name of the meal. And then the class name is going to say size dash full, so width and height of full, object dash cover, then transition with a duration of 500. And then on group hover, meaning when you hover over the entire card, then you want to scale this to 105. Now, the group hover class will not work if the parent does not have the class of group. Take note of that. Now I can save that, and we should be able to see the meals right there. And you can see that when you hover over them, the image zooms in just a bit. It's because of this overflow hidden. It zooms in without going outside of the card. And of course, it zooms in because we are scaling it up to 105. Now, below this div, we're going to have another div with the class name of padding all around of 5. And then inside this, we're going to have an h3 with the class name of text dash large and font dash medium, and then truncate. And then this is going to say meal.str meal. So that simply its name. Below the h3, we're going to have a paragraph with a class name of text dash sm and text dash muted, and then margin top of 1. And then this is going to say view recipe. And then we're going to say ampersand LARR. And sorry, RARR, so left arrow. This should say ampersand. And we're going to have that. So view recipe, and then this light arrow is this HTML entity. So you can see right there. And then of course, look at our sticky navbar, looking very nice, right? Fantastic. So that means that we can maximize this and look how it looks on large screens. Now, of course, it looks boxy because we are applying a class here called rounded card, which we don't have in our CSS. So all this is going to come together when we finally populate our CSS, but you can see that we're getting back very, very nice data from the API. Now, of course, the next page that you need to build, or the next component if you want, is the meal details component. So that when you click on this, you can see details about that particular meal. But take a look at this. I can filter by category. So when I click on a category, it filters it, as you can see right there. And then look at the scroll bar. I hope this works, but look at the scroll bar, look at its size. And then when I scroll down, it loads some more items, you can see. And then when I scroll down, some more items are loaded in. So that is our infinite scrolling that keeps people on social media. Now, when I click on one meal here, it takes me into the meal page and then the ID of that particular meal. And you can see we are seeing the meal detail page. So let's go ahead and build that page right away. So Control P and then search for meal detail right there, enter, and then you can jump directly into that file. So inside here, we're going to import the use params, which is a hook that is coming from React DOM. And then we're also going to import the link component. And then we're going to import use meals, our custom hook. And then we're going to import a custom function called extract ingredients. This is going to be coming from ./lib/utils. Now let's go ahead and create this function right away. So Control P and then just search for utils. You can jump directly into it. And I'm going to place this perhaps on the bottom, and I'm going to say export const extract ingredients. This is going to take in the meal as an argument, and we're going to say const ingredients is equal to an empty array. And then we're going to map over them, or not map, but loop over the ingredients. So we're going to say, for let I is equal to 1, so the first ingredient, and then I is less than or equal to 20, meaning it is the final ingredient, because all those meals have at least one ingredient, but not more than 20. And then we want to go ahead and increment I every single time that there's an extra ingredient. This should be a semicolon, so a for loop basically. And I'm going to say const ingredient singular is equal to meal, and then open this up, backticks str ingredient, and then $ curly bracket, pass in the index. So the reason why this is important is because the way that it is stored in the API is str ingredient 1, str ingredient 2, and so on and so forth up to number 20. Now I want to do the same thing, but for the measure. So measure, and this is going to say str measure, capital measure, and then $ curly bracket the index. So the same way str measures are stored as str measure 1, 2, 3, 4 up to 20. Now we're going to say that if ingredient exists and the ingredient dot trim, meaning you are removing extra space at the end of it, then we're going to say ingredients dot push, so pushing into this array that we've created on top. So we are going to go ahead and push the ingredient and then the measure that we have just created right there. So this is going to allow us to map over the ingredients and measures much more efficiently rather than checking for each one of them individually. And then of course I am missing something. We need to go ahead and return ingredients right there. So don't forget that the function must return something. So back inside our meal details, what we're going to do is we're going to destructure the ID from use params. Now what use params does is that it accesses this unique part of the URL so that you can destructure it in this case, and then you can get that particular part of the URL so that you can use it in your application. So use params, and then we're also going to destructure the meal and loading and error. This is all coming from use meals, and we're going to pass in null and then ID. And of course, I know you understand why. Now we're passing in null and then ID. And then if there's a loading state, so if loading, then we're going to go ahead and return a div with a class name of maxwidth-4xl. Let me pause a bit because there's some noise. Okay, it's finished. And then mx auto, and then padding on the x of 6 and padding on the y of 12. And then we're going to say animate-pulse. And then inside this div, we're going to have another div with a class name of height-10, and then bg gray-200. And on dark mode, we're going to say bg gray-700, and then rounded, and then width-1/3, and then margin on the bottom of 6. And that is a self-closing div, rather it's a div with nothing inside. We're going to create another div with a class name of height-96 and bg-gray-200, and then on dark mode, bg gray-700, and then rounded-card, and then margin on the bottom of 8, just like that. And then if there's an error, then we're going to go ahead and return return a div with a class name of padding all around of 10, then text red that's 500, and this is simply going to say error that we're getting back from use meals. And then we need to go ahead and get the ingredients. So let me do it on top. So const ingredients, ingredients is equal to extract ingredients, so the function that we've just created, and then pass in the meal that we're getting back from here. So this should say const. Fantastic. And then now we can begin to build out our return. So we're going to turn a div with a class name of max width dash 4xl. So max width dash 4xl, mx auto, padding on the x of 6, padding on the y of 12. Inside this, we're going to have a link component, which is going to be linking to the / the homepage. And then the class name for this is going to say text-sm, and then text muted. And then on hover, we're going to say text-primary, and then transition. And then for this, we're simply going to enter ampersand LARR, so left arrow. And then we're going to say back. Now below the link, we're going to have an H1 with a class name of text-4xl and font-semi-bold, and margin on the top of 4, margin on the bottom of 8, and then tracking-tight. And then this is going to say meal.str meal. Can save that, and we're going to have broken. Let's check why. It says reading str ingredient 1 cannot read properties of null. So it's the same error that we're getting back a few moments ago. Reading str ingredient 1, but that is correct. That is correct. And you know, the problem here is just this part, the fetch means in the use meals. I think there's something I'm doing wrong somewhere. Let's go ahead and console log the results just to see whether we're getting back anything on the screen, whether in our console. Are we? Or maybe we should be on the homepage and then reload that. Oops, homepage, reload. Search for chicken. Current properties reading get. That's a problem. That is a problem. Okay, so I've finally got it to work, and this is what I've done. So first thing is that I have brought this down from the top. So it is no longer on top, it is now on the bottom, because it was evaluating this before checking whether meal exists. So you want to check whether meal exists first, and then once it exists, that's when you want to check for the ingredients for that particular meal. Now, this is also another part that I've added in, which is checking if there's no meal, then it renders a fallback UI instead of just rendering a blank page as it was rendering beforehand. And then in our utils, I've also added in this check. So if there's no meal, then return null. And let me see what happens if I disable this. Reload. Okay, so nothing happens. So I think it is safe to remove it from there because we're already adding the check inside here. So it should now be safe. So you can see that we can see the back button as well as the name of our meal. So let me now place this to the left, shrink this down, and then we can continue. So below the H1, we're going to turn a div with a class name of rounded-card, and then overflow-hidden, and then shadow-card, and margin at the bottom of 8. Inside this, we're going to have an image, close it out. The source for this image is going to say meal.str meal and then the alt attribute is going to say meal.str meal, and then the class name is going to say width-full, and then object-cover. You can save that, and that is going to show the meal right there. And then we're going to go below this div. We're going to create another div with a class name of grade, and then on medium screens and above, we're going to say grade-columns-2, and then give it a gap of 12, so gap-12, and then margin on the top of 10. And then inside this, we're going to have a div, and then inside this div, we're going to have an h2 with a class of text-xl, and then font-semi-bold, and then margin on the bottom of 4, so margin bottom of 4. This is now going to say ingredients. You can save that, and we're going to have the text right there. Below the H2, we're going to have a UL with a class name of space on the Y of 3. So unordered list. And inside here, we're going to map over the ingredients. So ingredients.map. And then for every item that we get back, we also want to get back the index. And then we can go ahead and return a list item with the key of index. And then the class name for this is going to say flex and justify dash between. And then border dash bottom, and then border dash border, border dash border, and then padding on the bottom of 2 and text dash muted. Close it out. Inside this, we're going to have a span, which is going to say item.ingredient. And then we're going to have another span, which is going to say item.measure. If we save that, we're going to have the ingredient and then the measure. So look at that, looking very nice. Now we're going to go below the UL, and then below this div, we're going to have another div. And then inside this div, we're going to have an H2 with class name of text-XL, and then font-semi-bold, and then margin on the bottom of 4. This is going to say instructions. Below the H2, we're going to have a paragraph with a class name of leading-relaxed, and then text-muted, and then white space dash pre dash line. And then this is going to say mail.str instructions. Save that, and you can see the instructions right there. Now if you make this full screen, this is how it looks on full screen. So you have the large image, scroll down a bit, get the ingredients, the steps, and it looks nice. If we go back, we can select another meal, and you can see that right there. Look at that, very nice. Now there's a component we need to create, which is the skeleton card. We created it, but it is technically empty. So we can move the import on top, and then we can go ahead and return a div here, the class name of bg-surface, and then rounded-card, shadow-card, overflow-hidden, and then animate-pulse. And then inside this, we're going to have a div, the class name of aspect-square, and then bg gray-200, and then on dark mode, bg gray-700. And then inside this div, this is a self-closing div. Really can't see. So this is a self-closing div, or that it's a div with nothing inside. And then we're going to get another div with a class name of padding all around of 4, and then space on the Y of 3. And then inside this div, we're going to have another div with a class name of height-4, and then bg gray-200. And then on dark mode, bg gray-700, and then rounded, dark mode, bg gray 700, and then rounded, and then width -3/4, so 3/4. What am I doing? What is that? Okay, this should be a dot. Okay, and then copy this down. Now this second one is going to say height-3, and then rounded, and then 1/2. Save that, and that is our skeleton card. So that if you had some slow loading, you can see that is the skeleton loading component right there. Now the final thing that we need to fix, and we have two things. We have our CSS, and then we have our search function here, because why is it saying failed to fetch meals? So let me go ahead and figure that out, and then we can continue. Okay, so I've just opened this file, and I've realized what the issue is. This part is wrong. It should say api.get, not api.axios.get, such that now if we try to search for this again, then it should search. There we go. So you can see that because of the bouncing, it delays a bit. So you can search for bit, it delays a bit, and then it searches for whatever we have typed in. Fantastic. So now let's go ahead and fix our CSS, and I'm going to do a bit of copying and pasting because I don't like writing CSS these days because I'm so used to Tailwind. So I have copied my CSS from the repository, which you can get in the description below. And I'm going to jump into my index.css and then just paste it in. And then let's go through it. So we are importing Tailwind CSS, obviously. And then we are defining some colors here. So sorry, not some colors, but some variables here, which are going to act as our global variables. And then we are defining our dark theme variables here as well. And we are saying that on dark theme, then the colors are going to change a bit, but then these are going to remain the same. Only the colors right here are going to change, and the primary color is also going to remain the same. And then right here, we're defining some styles for the body. So BG neutral, which is this class right here, the class names right there. And then text gray 900. And then on dark mode, you want the text to be white. And then anti-alias for the font. And then transition colors with a duration of 300. So when you're switching between the fonts. And then the font family is set to this. The buttons are all going to have a cursor of pointer. And then right here, we are defining class names for our scroll bar. Because if you remember this is the repository. So I can mention it again. If you go into my GitHub profile, right here is my GitHub profile. You can search for this repository. So food palace updated, and you can get all of this code that we're writing. But then I was explaining that, okay, it has updated. I was explaining that if you go back to the category tabs and then shrink this down, you can see that the scroll bar right here, it was a bit intrusive. So if I disable all this, if it's going to disable, it was a bit intrusive, as you can see right here. So I just added in these class names so that it doesn't do that. Oops. So that it's just a bit smaller. And then by adding in these class names, I've set the width of the vertical scroll bar to 0 so that we can't see it. So I think this is a much better user experience. And as you can see, we have added in our CSS and everything looks so much cleaner. So there we go. That is our application complete. And once again, if you want to have access to the code that I've just written in this project, then you can go into my GitHub profile, or you can simply check the link in the description. The repository is called Food Palace Updated. I thank you for watching up to this point. And if you've reached this point, then please subscribe to the channel. I'm hoping to get to 1 million subscribers by the end of this year. I don't know if I will make it. I hope I do make it. Even if I don't make it, it's still okay. But I hope you're going to accompany me on this journey, and I will see you in the next one. Okay. Intro.